Graphic design defined. The what, how, where, when and who of graphic design. Welcome to Graphic Design Defined. Over the coming weeks, we'll take you on a stroll through the technicolor world of graphic design. We will cover everything from the visual and psychological art of storytelling, including branding, typography and logo design, to what to expect from a career as a professional graphic designer. This series of podcasts is brought to you by the British Academy of Graphic Design. Hi there, I am Fiona Byrne and I'm sitting here with the Academy's lead tutor and professional graphic designer extraordinaire, Sam Baker. And today we are going to talk about print versus digital in graphic design. UI and UX design more specifically, but we'll cover the broad sort of print v digital. So I guess, Sam, maybe you could just talk us through the fundamental difference between print and digital design.
Sure. So print, obviously, it's printed. So you need to bear in mind that the color values and everything that you put into the printed document. So you need to be aware of CMYK and RGB and all that, the differences between them, which we'll go into a little bit later, I suppose. And obviously, the digital stuff, you're going to look more towards the hexadecimal codes of color and the RGB codes. So and obviously the differences between how one looks against the other. So I suppose that the first thing as a designer you need to be aware of in terms of UX and UI and website and printed versus is the differences between them and how aware you need to be of how a color looks on your screen, because you're probably going to be designing it on a screen to begin with, versus how it prints.
Mm-hmm. I've never heard of hexadecimal. What's that?
Yeah, it's a hex code. So it's like if you go on any website and obviously do like a little a pointer to collect the color, if you like, you'll have a hex code from it. So it's basically web speak. So it's a coder type talk. So rather than put RGB or a value in, which can be quite long, it's a code which is usually I think it's about eight different variants on letters and numbers, basically, and that relates to exactly a color, basically.
So would you say the fundamental difference between print and digital is color related?
In some ways, yeah. Obviously, you've got difference in terms of file sizes as well. So your DPI. So a screen obviously is 72 DPIs. So that's dots per inch.
Yeah.
And then print is predominantly 300 DPI upwards, depending on the size of your item. And it depends on scaling as well, because you can scale things down at 600 DPI that then doubles up to 300 DPIs if you double the scale of the piece, if you like.
Yeah. So then when it comes to print design, does anyone still use old-fashioned paintbrushes and pens and print?
Yeah, it's becoming quite a big thing now. I think it's a bit like vinyl is in the sort of music industry. It's coming back round to that kind of hand-produced element to it. Obviously, we've gone through a stage of digital mania we've got printers now that are hundreds of millions of pounds worth of printer that's just sat in this huge room that churns through some ridiculous pages per minute, that kind of thing. We've gone back down to that kind of hand-produced sort of things like wedding cards and things that need a little bit more love, maybe. And then you've got your foiling and stuff, which can be done digitally, but it's better if you take that little bit longer and kind of love the piece a little bit. I'm showing my age, but yeah.
No, I agree with you though, because there's a craftsmanship in that's kind of in danger of becoming extinct. I mean, I'm guessing then that's only for sort of small productions, like things like weddings and stuff like that.
I mean, it's smaller print runs, definitely. You don't want to be sat there doing hundreds of thousands of tiny bits of foil on your little press in your room trying to press it home.
A book run, like printing the whole novel. No, not a good idea. So would you say that's the major advantage of digital over analog? Do you call it analog even when you're referring to graphics?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. I think, it is. It's obviously a huge draw of digital printing as we know it today, is that you can turn something out that looks very, very good,
Yeah.
highly detailed, quickly, and at such a huge quantity of amount of stuff that you can
Yeah.
put through it. It may not look quite the hand finished sort of elegant piece of like if I was to do it in my room on a press or whatever, but it will look high end, depending on the type of printer that you use.
There is a level of perfection there as well, that when it comes to digital, like anything in a digital format, you're really going to get it down to the tightest corner, kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you can do. Although
And
there's still tolerances in printers and stuff, obviously, because they're going through rollers and they're going through cutters and stuff, and there can be tolerances. So you just need to be aware that you send things to print that you have bleed and stuff like that still. Lots of people just forget about that because, like you say, it's seen as being so perfect.
yeah,
But the moment you send something without bleed or not bearing in mind the bleed from color to negative area within the print, will be your downfall.
yeah, the death of printing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say then, from a graphic designer's point of view, I mean, do you have to click a different switch in your brain? Is there a different mindset when you're approaching the two different, print versus
there is.
digital?
I think predominantly now we tend to see things on screen before we see a printed version of. Obviously, that was different back in before the web really kicked off as it did. I'm showing my age again, but I think when I first started out, I'd just design in CMYK and then break everything down to RGB and hex later on. But a
Right.
lot of people work almost the other way around now. So they're starting in RGB and then they're working backwards if they need to do something printed. But because printing's, I say rare, but compared to how it was, it's more rare to get a printed flyer or whatever. You're just going to produce something on socials that takes you minutes, and you can produce it really quickly and to an audience which could be billions all the way around the world.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a different way of looking at things.
And then, is there a risk then that, things will look different colors or, on different screens, not just the size and the aspect, but the actual color, because people have different settings or different types of screens.
Yeah, I think there is. Obviously, most screens are calibrated, so they'll tend to come automatically calibrated within a certain gamut of colors, so 240, whatever it is. So generally, they do tend to look the same, but there are differences within it depending on your settings that you have. But I think one of the big things to point out is if you are designing something with RGB, like a logo or some sort of branding materials that we've obviously spoken about in previous episodes, you just need to be aware of how that translates to a printed item, because sooner or later there is going to be a printed element to it.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing some branding stuff, it's bound to be printed at some stage. And if you haven't bared in mind the fact that it's going to be printed and you're going to have to transfer those RGB values to CMYK, you may find that the color does not look very good as a CMYK.
Really? Okay.
You need to run it through as you're doing those early stages of development within your logo or within your branding. You have to bear in mind the fact that you need to think about how that color will look, and actively check it constantly, especially compared to other colors as well. If you've got a logo with 3 colors in, 2 of the colors might look really good when printed, but one of them will look really washed out or something, or you'll lose it.
Is all this design chat suddenly stirring something up inside you? Head over to graphicdesignacademy.uk. You'll get loads of info on courses, flexible study plans, and easy payment plans. I mean, you said that you're changing it from CMYK to RGB. So I'm guessing then there's variations of colors when you do that. So you have to make adjustments to, And then is pigment come into play when it comes to printing? Or is that just a painting thing?
It does. It's the sort of the density and the value of the color. So like I said about the runs, the bleed through colors to lighter colors or negative areas. It depends on your stock as well, and how well that stock takes color. So if you've got a matte or a satin sort of stock, it will tend to bleed more.
Gotcha.
Because the actual stock itself allows for that kind of dispersion of paints, if you like. Ink.
And then presumably then, when it comes to particularly UI and UX and digital design, it's got moving parts literally, as well as, like, say, a poster. When you think of print, it's static, right? You're thinking of a poster, a book cover, something like that. So it's kind of a whole different beast, right? I mean, they're hard to compare. But like you said, these designs exist in both the printed world and the digital world. So is that all down to having your sort of style guide again, and you're sticking really closely? I mean, how far can you stray when you're going from one to the other, if you get me, particularly when you're going from static to digital?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, the guidelines are obviously a big part of how you set up your branding sort of elements within your brand. So you just need to be aware of how those colors look and what those values need to be, because some transferable elements, so your CMYK through to your RGB, they'll look quite similar, but you could have options within those breakdowns. So you've designed something in RGB and it's got a value, and then you've transferred it into CMYK, but there's maybe 3 options within there. So there's like a very slightly lighter version or a very slightly darker version. And then there's one that you think that's the one that relates visually better and will sit better against the other colors within.
Are you using your eye to do that?
A little bit, yeah. You can use checkers and stuff online. So there's a lot of contrast checkers and things like that available. Adobe do a great one where you can just run colors through it and how they look together and how they'll work on screen as well as how they'll work potentially printed.
Yeah, because people's eyes are different. Like men see colors different to women. You know,
an extra color, yeah.
And some people don't even know they have color deficiencies, you know, until it's highlighted to them. So yeah, I guess you can't just fully rely on. I mean, yeah, okay, you're going to have certain artistic leanings and a creative eye, as they say, but it's not reliable, right? I mean,
no, it's not. And you are right. People do see colors differently, so you just need to be aware of how. Like I say about the contrast checkers, it's really interesting to run colors through there that work alongside one another or are designed to in your concept, and then it might throw up the fact that certain people that struggle with there's loads of different variations on how people see colors, but certain people will struggle more with your selection you've made, so you might want to think about using it to this, for example. And it's really important to have that actively involved in your process, your design process. Otherwise you get too far down the line and you go, these colors don't work.
That's it.
And you can have to go back to the drawing board, basically.
They can work for yourself, exactly. Yeah. And does the same thing apply then when it comes to sort of typeface and font, when you're looking at both digital? So some things look great on a screen, for example, but don't look so great.
Yeah, they can do. All those screens nowadays are obviously a hell of a lot better. So it will depend on how you've applied the color and how you've applied the stroke and how everything that's going on, background and foreground within the piece visually on a screen. But UX and UI are very specific niches in graphic design. So you kind of have to be aware of how that will have an impact on that area if you're not specifically going to be working within that area, for example.
Yeah. So then when it comes to UI and UX design, I mean, there's a massive amount of functionality that's as important, in some cases, maybe even a little more important than the aesthetic. So do you, like, from your personal experience, I mean, do you have an approach there on how you sort of balance those and prioritize, like, which comes first, function, aesthetic?
Formal function, yeah.
Yeah.
It is a tricky one because you kind of, you are, as a designer especially, you are stuck between a sort of rock and a hard place, because you want to make it look as good as possible visually, like you say, aesthetically, but actually it might not work sort of within an interface. It might not sit properly within an interface, maybe that's designed by someone else. The background doesn't work with your sort of logo or your icon or whatever it is, and the design's lost. It looks rubbish.
Yeah. But I'm thinking there must be certain, I don't know whether they've just evolved organically or whether it's by design, but there's certain, I suppose, rules of UX, because we all have behaviors online and we certainly open a web page, for example, or an app in the same way, and we look for the same things. Is there a sort of like template in a way for that, or is that something that's sort of evolved with how users have behaved in your experience?
100%, yeah, it has evolved. Although in a Western kind of culture, obviously we'll read
Sure.
left to right and we'll read top to bottom. So you kind of start in the top left corner and then you filter downwards. And a really interesting way of gauging how people are responding to your design. You can either do this before you've actually launched it for real, or if it's a website, or run it through some sort of focus groups, is to do like hotspots within the website or within your design to see where people are navigating to first. You might find hierarchically that they're going to that top left, or you might find that they're drawn to the visual aspect within it somewhere else. In which case, everything else has a knock-on within the experience, the user experience, as it were, and then the user interface needs to respond to that. So your form follows the function, and the function follows the form. Sometimes it kind of goes round and round.
Oh, that's interesting. So that means then that from a design point of view, you can dictate if you're good at it, I suppose, right?
Yeah, you have to understand it. It's like any principle or any kind of element that we discuss in graphic design. It's understanding it in its basal form and then being able to manipulate it. One and the same thing. You have to understand it to be able to manipulate it. So